Hello, I'm Nan McKay, and I would like to introduce you today to Tiffany Manuel. Tiffany, referred to as Dr. T, is president and CEO of The Case Made, an organization dedicated to helping leaders powerfully and intentionally make the case for systems change. At the Housing Crisis Summit, Richard Rothstein and Dr. Tiffany Manuel discussed the nationwide movement of local collaboration they're launching to work on fixing the structures, policies, and systems that are described in The Color of Law. So welcome, Dr. Tiffany Manuel.
Thank you so much, Nan. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Tiffany, tell us about the movement that you and Richard Rothstein are working on to redress racial segregation.
Well, so thank you. I'm excited to share that. This really is an outgrowth, as you said, of The Color of Law, which many of you know Richard Rothstein published many years ago, and has continued to be this kind of conversation around housing systems, has continued to be kind of at the forefront, I think, for many of us about how we created, right, a housing system that works for some, but not all. And also how we potentially can remake that system. If we made it the first time in a way that wasn't terribly equitable, we can remake it in ways that are much more equitable. But this movement sort of grew out of Richard saying, I want to be able to engage average everyday folks around this issue of racial segregation. It is a foundation for a whole series of both challenges and opportunities in communities. And this is an opportunity for us to really get underneath that and address it. And so I would say that, you know, through Richard's sheer force, personality, and desire to kind of get at this, he's invited a group of folks who care deeply about what's happening in this country around civil rights, a group of folks who actively work on issues that are tangent to or directly affecting civil rights, and pulled us together around this issue. And so we are together launching a national movement to start to talk about this in much more thoughtful, specific, and meaningful terms.
Well, when is the official launch and who will be involved?
Great question. So there's no particular date. I think it's 2021 is our launch. Actually, we had planned to do it in 2020. But as you all know, 2020 has just taken its own kind of twists and turns. And we thought, you know, we needed to sort of wait because there's so much happening. Even the ability to organize folks in the way that we had originally envisioned really needed some rethinking. So we've taken, I think, the balance of this year to step back to rethink not only just the timing of it, but how we actually engage. If direct organizing isn't the way that we're going to be able to do this, then how do we organize virtually, and what are the pathways to be able to do that? So early 2021, right, many of you will get kind of more notice and information about launching a movement. And for us, it means initially putting out materials that can help folks begin to organize people in their communities around what you can do. And I would say, you know, it's not just the kind of organizational organizing. It's not us trying to go out and get organizations to do that. We're happy to partner with any number of organizations, but this is, how do you get your neighbors, your family, your friends, right? The folks who are, you know, average everyday folks to lean in on an issue that has been hard for us as a nation, right? What are the tools that you can use to do that? And that we're calling kind of the launch of this movement of average everyday folks saying, hey, I may not be any big wig in any particular organization, but there are some things that I can do to address this, and I'm going to do that.
Well, I think that's great. Let's talk about the why for a minute. In his book, The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein makes the case that the federal government's policies have had the greatest impact on segregation in housing, and therefore on the ability to amass wealth by African American families. Give us some of your thoughts on that, because isn't that part of the why?
Certainly, it is that we know that the wealth gap has always been wide, but has been widening even during a period where you know, the 70s and 80s and 90s, there was an expectation that civil rights would by itself close that gap. And that's not what we've seen. And a part of the difficulty of that has been the kind of entrenchment of a housing system that has been sort of built around segregation. And that really, I think, is the hallmark of Richard's kind of analysis that comes to mind for all of us, is we've built a system that produces, right, as part of the work that it does, segregated communities, even when even when we're not trying, because of the way that it's organized, produces that anyway. And so the opportunity is to undo that. And that's the bigger why, not just because it's unjust, right? It's unjust to sort of have a system that's organized for winners and then have lots of folks be sort of losers out on the kind of shared prosperity, but because honestly, Nan, the future of this country is going to be about how we're able to envision and enact a more equitable America. It just is. We can't get to the economy that is coming, the technological resources that we need, the health resources that we need, the school systems that we need without reimagining, right, what our systems are able to produce. And so from my vantage point around what the why is because we want the future to be bright. I have two kids, I have two boys, bright, bushy eyed. They want to take the world by the horns and do something great. And I want them to do something great too, but I know that they won't be able to get there in a world that is producing as part of its work inequality, and that's producing the kind of unfortunate outcomes that we see happening across the country today.
Well, let's talk a minute about the what, because I think a lot of people think redress, oh, you just want to pay everybody back pay in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I doubt if that's what it's really all about. Tell us a little more.
Yeah, it's not only just that you have to acknowledge what the systems of the past have created in terms of very diverse, or I would say very distinct, right, patterns of folks who've been winning because they got the equity in their homes and they're able to live life and pass that wealth on to their future generations. It's that also there's been a cost to lots of families who didn't get the opportunity to do that, even though they worked as hard as lots of other families. So it's not saying that you can go back and try to change those policies. The impacts they had was what they have. But it does suggest that we do something about that, right? And so there are many different schools of thought. Some people say, hey, you need to figure out the institutions that were responsible for that, right? In the same way they baked in inequality, can they bake in equality, which is repairing some of the harm that happened before? And there are lots of ways to do that. For example, mortgage companies, right, who gave much higher interest mortgages to borrowers of color, even though the circumstances or their credit was about the same. That had a negative harm on folks. And so now you can ask those same institutions, can you give an advantage, right, to those borrowers who come forward now, who may be in those similar circumstances, just because, right, you need to make up some ground for what some of the things that happened before. And I know that can be hard for a lot of folks to swallow, because folks think, well, just clear the board and let's just stop discrimination and that's the end of it. But I think if you do that and you don't and you don't try to repair some of that, that's when you get folks being very, they don't, it's not fair, and they don't want to sort of lean into a system that they feel is patently unfair. Our ability to repair that is really important. And so a part of the movement is about how do we do that? And I would say, Nan, the thing about it is every community is different, and how that will take place in different community is different. So you get together with the folks in your community and figure out, like, what is it that what we want to do or can do to redress some of these issues. In some communities, it might mean, we tackle the mortgage companies. In some communities, it may not. It may be that we build more affordable housing for folks who may not have had a shot. In some communities, it may be that we change zoning to reflect the fact that we want more racial, ethnic, and economic diversity. It'll take different forms in different places, but the point is that we know this is something we need to work on. We know that we need to dismantle unjust systems, and we know that we're working for a future that is more equitable. And together, we get there if we do the work.
Another problem that has been prevalent in talking to some of my guests is the valuation of homes.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I think we need to have some kind of look at the appraisal system. Figuring out what would be the value, and is there a difference in how people are looking at things, depending on whether there is an African American family or a white family in the home. There's so many areas that are issues that really need to be looked at in order to make any change. And those issues are pretty much around policy. You know, I've been involved in housing, affordable housing, subsidized housing for over 50 years. And I certainly have seen, even in the housing industry, in the industry through HUD, HUD had some policies from the very beginning that were very hard to undo. And now have we got enough of those policies in place and the funding in place to be able to do what we need to do to make this more equitable?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Nan, for just naming a few of the issues. I think the good news and the challenging news about this situation is there's so many different parts of this challenge that we could grab and say, okay, we're going to work on this. You named one of them, which is just the valuation for housing over time and how that's changing and for different groups. And that's one thing. I mean, they're just enormous numbers of even how we regulate housing, how we do our zoning, how we produce bonds for communities, how we invest in schools and neighborhoods, and how all of that is up for grabs. And to my mind, the beauty of that is, right, we may not be able to agree on 10 things, and right, let's find the two that we do and let's work on those in this community. You know what I mean? Like in every community, like there's some things that we can work on together. Okay, well, maybe, we maybe it's not the mortgage stuff, but maybe let's work on, looking at our deeds. Our deeds, if you go, many people are living in homes where there's deeds, where on their deed it talks about this home will never be sold to a person of color. That's on the deed. Well, maybe we just start there. I want that. Go down to the Office of Records. I want that off my deed. I no longer want this to be a place that specifically says this home can never be sold to a Black person or person of African descent. That offends my sensibilities, and I want that off. Right? Even that, right? Like that. If that's the thing that you can do, like look at your deed and see what, and say I want this off. Yeah, then take that step, and then the next town over, they may want to do something different. But I think it's for all of us to think about, to at least be thoughtful about what the issues are, and then figure out together what is it as ours to do. I mean, I think if all of us are working on little pieces of this, you start to patch a quilt together, right, of us building slowly this more equitable, thoughtful future together.
You've written a book called Strategic Case Making. So tell us a little bit about the book and maybe some of the takeaways that you would like people to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, the challenges that I sort of talk about in the strategic case making is, so often we have these great ideas for this great future that we want to create, and it's hard to get people to lean forward. It's hard to get people to lean into something that's hard. And let me just say, I mean, you're talking about, racial segregation. It's not like you come home from a long day of work and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, but let me work on racial segregation. Like, said nobody ever, right? Nobody ever came home from work and was like, oh, I can't take it anymore. My next step, what am I going to do? Let's see. I got a little time to work on racial segregation today. Like, said nobody. So, strategic case making is a recognition that if you want to get people to lean in to do hard work, you got to lift up the issue in a way that connects to their aspirations for their own life, right? And so in the book, I give lots of specific examples, even a set of principles, like 10 what I call core case making principles for how you do that, how you get somebody excited about at the end of a long day, right, to lean into the work that you're trying to get them to do. You will not get them to do that by just talking about policy issues. Like they can hear that on the nightly news every night. You get them excited, but through another set of principles that I think are really important. And you, Nan, when you first started this conversation, share one of them, which is the why. Right? Everybody has a sense of why for their own lives, their why for their own aspirations. And when you connect the aspirations of the people you're talking to the issue that you want to, you connect those things together, that's when you get people to lean forward, right? Because they see the work that you're trying to do as directly related to the aspirations they have for their own lives. And that's when we get a different result. So I'd encourage folks, if folks have it, this is my copy of the book, Strategic Case Making. And the good thing, you can see all of the different things here, which is, I didn't just write it because, right, I wanted you to have it. I write it because it's important, even in the work that I do with my clients, as I help them sort of think through how to pull people forward in this conversation.
Well, it will be available for sale on our shop page. So hopefully
Wonderful.
you can go just directly there and get it. Thank you
Wonderful.
so much. I really appreciate your time, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Nan.